Hello. Okay then, Nigel. We're here
Hello.
to talk about the assessment task for theories, assessments and methods.
Yes.
So it's 4,000 words.
Yeah, it is.
There are 4 specific assessment criteria.
There are.
How do students start to tackle them?
Okay. Well, Jenny, what we know is that obviously every student has now finished or about to finish their first assessed placement. So what we want is for every person, and I hope they've been thinking of this as they've gone along, is to identify, and it's difficult to say, it's not a person, it might be an individual, might be a family, it might be a group you're working with, and that will vary depending on where people have undertaken their practice. And we want them to basically tell us a little vignette, like a little pen picture of that person or that person's situation, and then to really answer these 3 questions that we introduced right at the beginning of the module.
Yeah.
What's going on, which is theory of explanation. How do we order our understanding about that, which is about assessment? And then what are we going to do about it, or what have we done about it, which is intervention. And in essence, really, that's it. It's simple and as hard as that.
It sounds very straightforward.
Yeah.
Really.
Good. Okay. Well, let's give some illustrations. And I thought I spoke earlier today to Heather and Rachel. I said, just give us a random selection of where people have done placements. So I'm aware that whichever examples we give will kind of help for people more than others. But I know, for example, someone's been doing a placement with Rethink. So that's obviously a mental health, third sector charity. Now that person may have done some work with an individual. Let's call that individual Mary, who's someone who has a defined mental health problem,
Right.
and is using those services. So the trick right from the beginning is just to do a little pen picture, obviously anonymising Mary, but just tell us about this person, their age, their ethnicity, something about their biography, something about how they've had a kind of what people would call a moral career as a mental health service user.
So that should be quite short.
Yeah,
it
wouldn't be a lot, but it's enough so that we get a sense of, and I always say to people that what you and I will be doing as marking, and it's a thing I try and do, is to read that bit, and then it's almost as if like there's a dotted line.
Yeah.
You read no further and you think, now what is this person going to do on the next page as a writer in terms of theory? So if we think of Mary as a mental health service user, we're going to get straight away into the whole thing about how do we construct ideas of mental health. So the writer, the student's going to get into the whole discussion about the social model of disability or the social construction of mental health, depending on the kind of label the person has, and it may be, say, to do with depression or some form of psychosis. So they're going to give us some theoretical ideas and show that they can look at this person through a prism where you're going to see things in different colours. There's lots of different ways of seeing this. Medical models, social models, self-construction, how people define themselves. Is there something that is different around gender or about race or ethnicity that connects to this? So that's what we'd be looking for.
Okay, so theories to start to explain.
Theories to
what's going on.
explain, exactly. And what we want people to do is all the time echo back to the kind of ideas of people like Monroe, which is that so people doing social work practice should all the time be curious and actually be trying to search out other ways of seeing things. And there's no simple, so it's not just going with, but we'd also understand ideas about labelling, we'd understand ideas about very much, lots of stuff to do with user movements, and the 4th criteria is all about values and user perspectives. So the example I've given about Mary is you couldn't do this without a big user voice all the way through.
You couldn't, and to be honest, in mental health there is a wide literature, isn't there, around sort of service user
Yes,
perspectives
absolutely.
that the students could draw on.
Yeah.
But similarly with other topics.
Yes. Now, depending on where someone's working, the idea about assessment is quite difficult, because it may be an assessment they're actually doing, or it may be an assessment the person carries with them that someone else has done. So if you think about a charitable basis, you may not be doing much of a comprehensive assessment, but this person may have had a mental health assessment,
Mhm.
or they may have had a personalisation assessment. They may have, so by some other more statutory
Yeah.
function perhaps. So it's not. This isn't like a practice portfolio. It's not about what you've done.
Yes, it's quite a significant difference.
Yeah, the person you're working with, you're able to actually refer to the things they've experienced that other people have done,
Mm.
but all are part of their life. And you understand those things, because to be an effective practitioner, you need to understand what people have had before or are having right now, but done by others. So this person may well be, in their life, be having a number of assessments that are relevant, and you need to show that. and again, depending on the setting, that will show your understanding of the law. Some people, depending on where they've done placements, it'll be much more legal than others.
Yes.
If you're in a hospice, there's not going to be as much as, say, if you're working in an arena where there's concerns about a child's well-being, for
Mhm.
example. So it will vary.
Yeah.
So that's the assessment base.
So there is an expectation, I suppose, that students do engage with a framework for assessment in some way in relation to addressing that setting criteria.
Yes, and we did 2 sessions on that, didn't we, in the module? And I think you contributed to the one about children. So we, in broad terms, most people who receive services in the kind of settings people have done their placements will have had, be broadly speaking, something to do with the Children Act, if they're
Mhm.
children and families, broadly speaking, something to do with some aspect of community care, or the Care Act, or carers, or mental health, or so there'll be something. Now,
Yeah.
we're not going to, we're going to understand, by virtue of where people have done the placement and the case or the scenario, that there will be different levels of legal and formal assessment frameworks.
Yeah.
So I know that, for another example, someone's been doing a placement, say at the YMCA, or with the Prince's Trust, or with Framework, and the assessments there are going to be much looser than they
Yes.
would be, say, like in a mental health assessment.
Yeah, so it might be
That's
based
fine.
on an agency
Yeah.
procedural.
Yes,
approach,
absolutely.
just to gather
And people who've
information.
written these things before have often referred to that very useful model by Smale and Tucson, which distinguishes between exchange methods of assessment
Mhm.
and procedural ones. And that's a kind of indication of how you do things, but it's also an indication of the nature of the setting.
assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where they are.
Great.
So that's that bit, and then obviously everyone is doing some form of intervention. I mean, people have been working in placement settings where there are services, there are practitioners who are being, in effect, paid, commissioned by local authorities or by the state to provide a service. That's an intervention. So we're kind of interested in what is it that people have actually done. Now, if you've done a placement in something like the youth offending team,
Mhm.
you're going to tell us about a form of assessment, the ASSET process, and an intervention that actually practitioners don't have any choice about. That's just the deal. You know, this is what you get.
Yeah. Yes.
If you're working in another kind of setting, and I know that, say, someone's been working in a children's centre, a kind of family centre, Sure Start project, there's a whole range of different forms of interventions going on there, ranging from stuff to do with promoting an empowerment of women and young parents, through to parenting skills, which is all based upon learning theory and CBT and group work and whatever. So it depends on where you've been.
And some projects might have quite specific models of intervention that they
Indeed,
use,
yes.
like the Triple P programme, for example.
Absolutely,
that
which
kind of
is
setting.
a great example, because actually, yeah, if you're doing the Triple P programme, which we know has kind of been adopted in various settings, it's a kind of a label, but you need to get behind it.
Yeah,
What's informing? What's a model of intervention that's informing the Triple P programme? But where does it kind of come from as in these broad ideas? So it's kind of like Triple P is a kind of new idea,
Yeah.
but it's kind of like a new version of some old ideas. So the old building blocks of intervention that people are probably going to use is stuff around things like crisis intervention, task-centered theory, but some of the newer ones are going to be solution-focused, strengths approaches, and some of them about counselling, humanist intervention, relationship building, group work. So these are the sort of things we'd expect to see. Systems theory.
I mean, some students might be using a mixture of different approaches, mightn't they?
Absolutely.
So there's a word limit.
There's a word limit. What we don't want people to do is to say, well, and it's the old phrase, I had an eclectic approach, without telling us what it is.
Yeah.
Because that's like saying it's a
Did a bit
salad.
this, did a
But
bit
we need
that.
to know what the
Yes.
so we need to know what the components are. So it may well be eclectic. So it may draw upon behavioural ideas because there was some CBT. It may draw upon some task-centred work. So it's fine. But we need to know what those are, and for those to be kind of referenced.
Absolutely. And the other important thing about the intervention is there's an assessment criterion that specifically asks students to look at the research evidence around effectiveness, isn't there?
There is indeed. And I suppose the kind of simple phrase that illustrates that is this idea of what works. So is there some evidence which shows that? And of course we're always slightly wary about these generalising things, because social work's about emphasising the individual. But is there some research which says that for people who've got this kind of age group with these kind of drink or drug alcohol related problems, what kind of intervention appears to be most helpful according to X, Y and Z's research done in 2010 or whatever? And you need to cite that.
Need to go and find that.
They do.
That research evidence.
They do. So it's kind of what we call evidence-based or research-informed practice, what works. And we'd expect that to be some of it cited in general books and literature, but a lot of it will be journals.
Yeah.
So once you've identified your example of, if you're working in the YMCA, young people who are homeless, we would be looking for statistical relationships between often people who've come from vulnerable backgrounds, often people who've been in care, and then we look at what's the prognosis for people who are actually in vulnerable housing situations, what happens to people, how many people unfortunately progress sometimes into the secure estate, into incarceration in prison, some who get long-term mental health problems, some who do actually get into stable housing. How did that happen? What works for them?
Yeah.
And we want you to kind of refer to that literature. So, and of course the most important thing is always to remember is just the basics as well. Good spelling, good sentences.
Paragraphs centred around a single topic.
Yeah. Legal accuracy. Because otherwise people can do some fantastic work, but the marks will go down with those kind of errors.
Yeah.
So can you just remember when we marked these last year, where they were kind of, can you think of any examples that stood out as when it just kind of merited good marks?
Let me think. I'm just thinking of two that were quite different. One was where the student had used headings in order to differentiate between the different topics, but hadn't rigidly stuck to the assessment criteria as the headings. They'd used the sort of what was going on, how did we assess,
that kind of sequence of the thinking,
and within that they'd managed to really integrate a sort of ongoing discussion of the application of values and ethics, which is the fourth specific assessment criterion. And they'd just written in very, very straightforward English. It didn't sound like they'd swallowed a textbook. But they clearly evidenced that they understood the theories that they'd looked at in terms of, particularly in terms of explaining what was going on. And then the other assignment, there weren't headings, but the introduction was a very sort of brief outline of the case. And that was possibly a slightly more academic essay, so the practice focus maybe wasn't as strong in terms of the intervention section, but the way in which the student had explained the sort of theoretical concepts was absolutely brilliant.
Okay.
So you can do it in different ways and still get a good mark, I think.
It's not prescriptive, and it's actually it's a kind of discipline that social work hasn't been very good at, but I know that in nursing and in psychotherapy and psychological therapies, But people do this as a regular thing in practice, where people come together maybe once a month, once every 2 months, and say, just present a case.
Yeah.
Tell us about someone you're working with that you're struggling with, and it's like group supervision.
Yeah.
You then put out this sort of example, and then the rest of the group then thinks, well, before you go ahead, well, let's us think, how do we make sense of this? So what's our theoretical ideas, so that we help you with that? And then you might tell us, well, what I've been trying to do is that you give one example of intervention, but we'd say, well, there's 2 or 3 other, have you thought about this?
Yeah.
Now that's what we're going to try and do
What the presentation's
in the
about,
presentation.
isn't it?
So we're going to meet people in a couple of weeks. I can't remember the first day, excuse me.
Oh, I'll put it on Blackboard.
Put it on Blackboard,
Remember
good,
right there?
yes. So, and it's an opportunity, it's not mandatory. We're going to expect people to do this, and that's we want people to do this to collectively share ideas. It's not graded, but the idea is that people will say, this is my case, this is the scenario. Before they even go on to how do we make sense of it, what are we going to do about it, we'll get the rest of the group to say, okay, let's just write down what are we expecting, if we were marking, what would we expect to be in the first section about how do we make sense of this?
Yes.
What are we looking for? And then hopefully people will find that helpful.
Yeah. So it's really quite an interactive presentation. We're not expecting people to come and, this is my theory.
No.
So I'm just remembering that.
Yes.
Sorry.
It's the theory of the dinosaur.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's a
very
work in
interactive,
progress.
and it's about engaging with other people in the group to help you develop your thinking and ideas. Isn't
And
it?
it'll only work if people have actually come with a case.
Yes.
You've got to come with us be clear about, this is the one I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And I've already started, I've got some ideas, but you put out your scenario, other people will then respond and come up with theoretical explanations. We'll have a discussion, then we move on to what the assessment and intervention would be, and then hopefully people find that really helpful. And if it works really well, people say, oh, I read a bit of research about that you ought to put in. It's not relevant to my bit of work, but it would be to you.
Absolutely.
So it is a kind of form of sharing.
Yes.
And it's not competitive, so
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we will give out prizes and rewards to those people who, for people who come on the first day and say, I'm ready to go first. I'm sure there may be a sweet or something. Because otherwise we don't want.
The door now.
Otherwise we don't want people to say, oh no, I'll do it on the last week. That's not going to work. So we've got 2 weeks, I think,
weeks, haven't we?
and then we got tutorials on the last
week,
one.
and then we've got a hand-in window.
Yes.
After that.
Which is on Blackboard.
Yeah. Okay.
Are we sorted?
Will that do? Okay.
Perfect.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jasper.